So we were just talking about the two implosions that went into the convention hall. So Landmark 1995, and then we had Riviera 2016, both of them to make way for the West Hall, where the red is. And so I bring that up because during this time period, we're seeing expansion of an existing whatchamacallit, industry in the city. So since the 50s, we've been looking at conventions and diversifying what or how we bring money in. For a long time, it was just tourism, but then they started realizing you can make money off of businessmen who want somewhere nice to have their conferences. So that's our original conference hall. It's been rebuilt a couple of times, and then today Carpenter Cellars has rebuilt it. The West Hall, if you go to the next slide, that's what it looks like. And now they're essentially tying this motif to the rest of the central and south halls and the north hall, I think. They're bringing over that. So if you go on Paradise, you'll see all that construction. And then this is just the implosion of the Hacienda to make way for Mandalay Bay. And the concept of Mandalay Bay was Burma, but colonial Burma. And they named it Mandalay after the capital of Myanmar, which is Mandalay, but it's not really near a bay, nor does it have historic ruins of this kind. So it's kind of a lie, but essentially the Sim City they're building is a Southeast Asian Pacific development through a English colonial filter. When they started constructing it, Standard White Tower, it did have structural issues because it started sinking because the floor or the ground underneath it was not stable enough. So they did have to bring in piles, which are essentially really long sticks that you drive deep into the earth until the friction holds them. And yeah, that's how we got Mandalay Bay.
Okay.
This gets incrementally worse as you get to the top. So they did have to solve that at the very beginning. There's our entrance into the Mandalay Bay, where you can already begin to see the type of language that they're using, right? The inspiration from Burma or Myanmar that they're bringing. And what we see with Mandalay is that they're trying to do a higher end resort here, right? So yes, it is simulating a city, but it is also higher end, same thing that the Bellagio is doing. So we're starting to see that the market is oversaturating itself with this high end resort style. It brings in some more elements, so now we're beginning to see that they're bringing in entertainment that is not just gambling, that is not just the Disneyland shows, but also things that adults could enjoy without any children on the trip. And then this right here is going to be quite important. So we've been talking about the concept of a mousetrap for some time now. It started with the Flamingo and having people go through the casino floor before checking in. And we've seen it incrementally get larger and larger. But today it operates at a city scale. So all three of these properties were at some point owned by the Circus Circus Corporation. Again, Circus Circus, even though the casino isn't very popular, is a very profitable company. So all the three that we see here, Excalibur, Luxor, Mandalay, were all owned by the same entity. Now, because of that, some of the benefits are you can share amenities. So if you'll ever go to the Luxor or the Excalibur, you'll notice that the parking is shared between the two of them. And even between the three of them, it's just that Mandalay is a little further. You'll also notice that there is a monorail that runs from Excalibur to Mandalay, and it doesn't really go anywhere else on the strip. That's one of our problems. We have 4 monorails, privately owned. They don't really connect with each other because they all have each company's interests in mind rather than the whole city's interests in mind, or the entirety of the strip's interests. What we also see is that Mandalay adds a convention hall, which is all this area, it adds its arena, and the three of them use that same area. So if you're staying at the Luxor or at the Excalibur for a convention, the convention halls you're going to be using are actually Mandalay's. So now the mousetrap becomes even larger, and you'll notice that the pedestrian bridges at this point no longer lead into the sidewalk, they bring it directly into the casino itself, right? So you don't even have to get on the sidewalk to get into the property. Now, what we see here is it's also a filtering system. So when we talked about Excalibur, this was typically going to be our low rollers, right? So people with lower budgets, people that come with families, people that are not looking to spend a whole lot. Luxor is going to be in the middle, so it's going to be more oriented to middle class, and then Mandalay is going to be our high rollers. And so the idea is that even if you don't belong to 2 of those groups, you will find something in this little agglomeration of casinos that will fit your needs. So sure, Mandalay might lose some customers to Luxor and to the Excalibur, but ultimately they're all owned by the same company, so it's not really a loss to the mother company at all. there are those pedestrian bridges. So if you ever see them, you haven't thought much about them, just look where they lead. They lead you directly into the entrances. At this point, MGM lost its iconic lion, and the entrance is right into the casino floor for all of these, right? You don't really go down into the sidewalk on most of these properties. If you look up at the north end of the strip where the Fashion Show Mall is, you typically do have to come down to the sidewalk or around Caesars because those are older properties and they could not incorporate it as well. But given that these four corners for the most part are pretty new, they were able to fully integrate it into the architecture. So just another way the Mousetrap continues to grow in size and scale. Now eventually we get the Sands. This is bought by a guy named Adelson. Adelson quietly implodes it. He does not make a show out of it. He's not a showman. He's really just looking to make a profit. Prior to imploding the Sands, he had already expanded the convention halls. So if you ever drive by it, it's called Sands Road or Sands Street. And we do have the Sands Expo Center because it did actually belong to the Sands Casino at some time. And Adelson decides that he wants to build a modern casino, Y-shaped tower, no theme at all. Now, when he talked to his architects and all the people involved in the project, they told him, that that was not going to work because of the fact that if you could go gamble in the Bellagio or in the New York, or in Luxor, Excalibur Garage, etc., why would you go to a generic casino with no theme? And so Adelson decides the best thing to do would be, fine, we're gonna make it thematic, but we're gonna do it better than anyone else has, and we're gonna make it look real. So there he is, he opposes theme. This is Sheldon Adelson. Him and Steve Wynn are two big giants of the 90s and 2000s, and they're gonna compete with each other a lot, which we'll see. So then he reconsiders, and he goes, we're gonna make the theme Venice. And the reason he chooses Venice is because Venice is the first place where we see a casino ever be used. That's our first historical account of a casino in existence, and so he decides that that's a really good theme. It's already pretty iconic. We do have a lot of visitors. Once again, the demographic at this time is beginning to be empty nester baby boomers, and then younger Gen X who does not yet have children. So there is a lot of traveling, and Venice happens to be one of those spots where they like to go to. He takes his whole design team on a 3-week excursion to Venice. They document everything, the architects, the developers, everyone is there taking photographs to bring back. And they begin the construction. Venetian did have a budget of 2 years in order to be constructed, which is incredibly short for a project of this size, but they were able to get it done, and honestly, they did it quite successfully. There's some construction images. So what they did at the Venetian is they brought in master sculptors from Italy. They literally hired people from Venice that were, in these guilds. They were the descendants of those middle-aged guilds that we talked about that have been sculpting their whole lives. They brought them into Las Vegas. They introduced them to the union workers, and they set up shop for about a month or so. So the union workers were going to Italian sculpting academies within the Venetian before they went out to actually start plastering the thing. So it's really interesting that this amount of effort went into making the theme come alive. And we also see that they're not just replicating the idea of Venice, they're actually replicating true landmarks of Venice. So we have a couple here. We have the famous clock tower. We do have the Doge Palace. We do have the Campanile. Remember, the Campanile is the bell tower that is separate on Italian cathedrals. And then we have the famous bridge. So all of these are added onto the front so that when you go, in Adelson's words, you're not going to a fake Venice, you're going to the real deal. And this is the sort of architectural drawing and the level of detail that he expected for this to come to life. So he does bring in historians, sculptors, people that actively study Venice, professors are brought in, and all of them help to make the vision come alive. So the front of it is conceived as St. Mark's Square, the famous plaza in Venice, and then the interior, if you've ever been inside of the canals where it opens up, that is essentially a miniaturized version of it. And you'll see that they repeat some of the same monuments on the inside at a smaller scale. Here are some more architectural drawings, just to give you an idea of how much effort went into this project. We of course have the famous canals that lead you from the exterior into the inside. So another way to use the Mousetrap, you bring people in through entertainment, and they're paying to come into the casino on a gondola. When they had initially poured the water, because it was so clear and purified, it was very dead looking. It didn't really have a lot of pizzazz. And so Adelson proposed that they not only drain it to paint the bottom blue, but they also dye the water blue periodically. So every couple of months, they do have to take all the water out and add some color dye so that it looks extra blue. And the canals themselves were also given a very interesting shape. So you'll notice that they are not straight like the Forum shops in Caesar's Palace. They are becoming much more windy. And if you ever walk through the shops here, you'll notice that you don't really have a straight line of sight. It does encourage a lot of exploration. So as you're coming into the casino, initially you might just be a little bit interested, but you eventually start to get lost in the sauce until it drops you off in the casino floor, which is exactly where they want you. And along the way, of course, there is dining and there is shopping. So you're spending your money as you go. Here's the clear blue water that he dyes. Now, this casino in particular was very controversial because of the fact that it is emulating a very popular tourist attraction. And there begin to be a lot of architectural conversations, a lot of discourse around this and the phenomenon of replicating cities in Las Vegas. So some critics say that the real Venice is not nearly as nice as the fake Venice, right? It's overcrowded, water smells, you have scammers, you have flooding, while other people claim that even though it might not look as nice, it's the authentic thing. So this is where Vegas once again enters this architectural conversations, and we begin to see that people are beginning to think about it as more than just a fake city. They're starting to think about the larger implications of replication. The fake Venice, as you see, very clean. The water does not smell. In fact, it smells like chlorine, if anything. And you don't necessarily have scammers at every corner. It's a very clean, gentrified version of Venice, which is exactly what tourists would like to see when they go to the real Venice. And so the fake Venice starts to become a little bit more appealing than even the real Venice is to a lot of tourists, and it also makes it more accessible. So the real Venice is still, the plane ticket's still around $1,500 to get there round trip, plus all of the costs, the hotel. When you could just come to fake Venice, you could get a hotel room for around $150 a night. The plane flight, being that is domestic, will not be nearly as expensive, and you're gonna have a very similar experience. So people begin to see this as an opportunity to bring all of these wonders of the world to the masses who could otherwise not really afford to do so. The other conversation that begins to open up is which of the two Venices is more fake. So on the one hand, obviously our Venice here in Las Vegas is completely fake, but on the other hand, the Venice that is in Italy is increasingly beginning to take on a fake appeal because of the fact that locals cannot afford to live there anymore. So it is all just tourists and business. We are also seeing that the inner city, like most other American cities, is beginning to fall apart. They're not really taking care of it as much. With so much tourist and pedestrian foot traffic, it's really hard to do that. And then it's really dystopian to see the fact that we have these enormous cruise ships that, tower above the city itself, come in, deposit millions of tourists every year, and the city is just kind of sinking, and it really needs a lot of work. So, it begins to open up this dichotomy of the fake that looks better, or the real that's not doing so well. And that's a theme that we're gonna follow for a little bit. Then we have Paris. Not much to say about it, it's just Paris, right? Paris is basically chosen because it's the quintessential tourist spot for Americans, right? When you think of Americans going to Europe, they go to Paris, and you've all heard the stories, American tourists are annoying, blah, blah, blah. So they bring Paris over to us in order to satiate that need, once again, for the average middle-class person who can otherwise not afford to do so. But the other thing it does is it helps alleviate a lot of Paris syndrome. So if you don't know what Paris syndrome is, it's very prevalent amongst East Asian demographics, specifically the Japanese and Koreans, because they idolize Paris as this really beautiful, city of lights, the city to fall in love in. And then they get there and it's really just like any other city in the world. And so there's a lot of people that faint, and that's why it's called the Paris syndrome, because they view it with rose-tinted glasses. But with Paris Las Vegas, it is made with a rose-tinted filter over the entire thing. And so it's also very appealing to a lot of the Asian demographic that comes to Las Vegas for some time. And there we see, very clean. You don't necessarily have all of the grit that the real Paris would have. Washington Post says, Forget Paris. Las Vegas is about to offer you a much, much better version, one without French people. So just a very, very American take on it. But it goes to show, right, even these big journal companies are beginning to talk about Las Vegas in a larger context than just gambling. However, the French don't respond too well to this, and they say it is a city without shame that swallows up other cities to the point of reappropriating their urban icons in its own style and supplanting them as tourist destination. So the French are, some of them like it, a lot of them are offended by it though. We're taking their culture and we're exploiting it for money. They don't really see it as a very appropriate use of their icons. But I do want to remind us that meanwhile, in 19th century France, when it comes to world expositions, they were doing the exact same thing. They were bringing architecture from India, from Southeast Asia, from Africa, and they weren't even doing it just for tourism reasons. They were doing it in order to show that they are the superior race. So for the French to be saying, you're stealing our icons, blah, 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 is really quite hypocritical when they were the first ones in history to actually do the replication of cities, and they weren't even doing it for profits only. They were doing it for social Darwinist reasons. The other conversation that opens up about Las Vegas beginning to replicate cities is the fact that a lot of US cities have fake historic districts. So if you ever go to Santa Fe, the real Santa Fe historically is just post and beam work construction. But Santa Fe today, if you go to it, does have a lot of this adobe stucco covering, and they try to make themselves look like this authentic historic city, and so it becomes a fake reality. Vegas, on the other hand, is real fakeness, right? We know that we're fake, we advertise ourselves as such, and so it begins to open up another conversation. Is it better to be fake real or to be real fake? The other point that I would like to make is if you look around the larger United States, most communities, most gated communities are going to be themed in a either French or Italian version. They're going to have these Italian names. If you go to Summerlin and you look at the names of a lot of streets, they're going to be borrowing from other languages. And so it really isn't just the Strip or Las Vegas or even communities in Las Vegas. You go to California, you go to Florida, you go to New York, and you will see that they are essentially doing the same thing that the Venetian did. And I'm sure all of you have seen a Tuscan style, 2000s style kitchen. So it's just another smaller version. So to say that Vegas is the only one that is ruining all of these icons is really quite hypocritical. Lastly, I want to talk about the Aladdin, just an interesting little case study to see how quickly the market can shift depending on what the larger United States is going through. So the original Aladdin had built up a tower by this point. They decided to demolish it and just build it back up. So it wasn't that they were changing the theme or the name, they just wanted a new Y-shaped tower. And so emerges the Aladdin. Now, if you haven't heard of the Aladdin or seen it, the Aladdin is still in existence today, and it is on the Strip, and it is quite prominent. It's just that it did have a retrofit to it. Those are the bazaar shops inside of the Aladdin. Does anyone recognize them? It's not Caesar's Palace.
Planet Hollywood? Planet Hollywood?
Planet Hollywood, yes. So if you've ever gone to the Miracle Mile shops in Planet Hollywood, you'll notice that their theme is very Arabian Peninsula, Middle Eastern, Marrakesh style, and that is because that is the original Aladdin property. Now, in 2001, we had a certain event take place in the United States that didn't necessarily lead to a positive outlook on the Middle East. So once 9/11 happened, the Aladdin started doing very, very bad. For one, people thought that it would become another potential target because of the fact that it's borrowing Middle Eastern culture. And secondly, people were just being racist, right? So they just didn't want to go somewhere that was themed like the Middle East. And so literally 2 weeks after 9/11, the Aladdin went bankrupt. And as a consequence, New York, started doing very well, and people started leaving flowers all over the Statue of Liberty, and it became a symbol of patriotism. They brought in all of the American slot machines. So it just goes to show that Las Vegas does not exist in a vacuum. We are very prone and susceptible to larger American trends. The Aladdin really didn't even last 2 years. before it had to shut down because of that. So that's why it was rethemed to Planet Hollywood. And so, in the SimCity era, we learned two things. Number one, we learned how to make profits by borrowing attractions from other cities. Why would we have to make original ones when we have other ones out there we could just copy and make the same amount of money off of? And number two, we learned how to replace a sign with a landmark. So if you look at the Paris, if you look at the Bellagio, if you look at the Venetian, they do not have big flashing neon or LED screens. They instead have towers, campaniles, architectural landmarks, things that we would recognize that city by. All right. Now we're going to move on to what today's lecture is supposed to be, and that is the Strip and the exportation of Las Vegas. By this point in time, most other cities in the world, countries in the world, have realized that Las Vegas is doing really well. That this idea of having a mousetrap, a gambling machine that has entertainment, dining, resorts all in one is really profitable. And so we're seeing that in the 2000s, a lot of other cities begin to replicate what Las Vegas is. So this era is going to be called the Starchitecture Age. I put a question mark because we don't really know if we're still in it or if we are not. The person who coined all of the names that I've been using is Stefan Al, who wrote this book called The Strip and the Imagination or Reimagining of America. And he spoke at Duk Duk Shed last year. He argued that we are currently going through a different phase, which he called the sports phase, because of the fact that we have 3 new stadiums in the city and we're diversifying our economy even more. But it's up to you. We do still have some architecture out there. It's hard to say when it ended or if it has ended. So let's get started. In the Disneyland era, we did see our demographic was mostly here in the purple, our boomers, baby boomers with children. In the SimCity era, which we just came out of, we saw that it was empty nester baby boomers, and we are now having younger Gen X with no children. And then finally, in the Starchitecture phase, we are seeing that the baby boomer demographic is declining. We already have enough casinos catering to that demographic, and it is getting smaller, so it does not make sense to build for them anymore. It makes more sense to start following what Gen X wants and what millennials in the pink are wanting to see. And so, Gen X is doing quite well, right? They did, for the most part, start working in what was called the yuppie era, more or less, and then we have our millennials who are not doing so well. They started working in a time where wages were not really keeping up with the cost of living. So you put those two things together, and the thing that both of these demographics want is luxury. Gen X, for the most part, generally speaking, has been able to have access to some of those luxuries, and they would like to have a casino that offers those same services. Things like having celebrity chefs, branded stores to go to, nice cosmopolitan architecture. Meanwhile, millennials, who it is not as accessible for, want to live the fantasy of the luxurious lifestyle. And so casino owners take these two things, put them together, and they start what is called the Starchitecture phase. The other thing that Las Vegas starts doing, as always, we want to be different from any other city in the United States. So whatever the US is doing, we either react to it or we go completely opposite directions. In the 90s, we saw how the entirety of the US cleaned up its image. It got rid of its more gritty neon and its more explicit adult themes, and it went through a so-called Disneyfication. And so Las Vegas in the 2000s is going to try to rebrand itself. So, knowing what you know about Las Vegas, the way we like to reinvent ourselves, what would be the next logical step in our rebranding if the rest of the US is now clean and Disneyfied? What would we want to do? The opposite. So what kinds of things would we start seeing?
That kind of thing.
Yes. So this is the time period where we coin what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We are trying to make ourselves look like a city where, yes, the bad things happen, where you can be someone else entirely and do the things that are no longer acceptable in mainstream America. So this is coined in 2003. It is not that old of a phrase. and it comes out of the Vegas tourism department. They want to find a new way to bring in this younger millennial demographic that is rising, that is into risk, that is into luxury. And their version or their justification for this is the emotional bond between Las Vegas and its customers is freedom. The freedom on two levels, the freedom to do things, to see things, to eat things, wear things, and feel things. In short, the freedom to be someone who we could not be at home. And freedom, secondly, from whatever we wanted to leave behind in our daily lives. So just thinking about Las Vegas makes the bad stuff go away. At some point, that strategy became clear. You have to speak to that need, make an indelible connection between Las Vegas and the freedom that America craves. And so once again, now that the US is all clean, sweet and clean, we don't have adult themes anymore, that is exactly what Las Vegas is going to try to capitalize on. So, for one, Cirque du Soleil does take a naughtier turn, and it opens Humanity, where they do use fake genitals, since you technically cannot show real genitals on stage, but they do put on fake genitals to make the show happen. It is obviously not kid-friendly. And then we also see that the prior, the pirate show at the Treasure Island, which used to be kid-friendly, also takes a more sexy approach, and it turns into the Sirens of Treasure Island, where it's a singular sailor that's being lured by all these women. We also see nightlife really begin to take off. So in 2005, we have Tao. In 2013, we have Hakkasan, Dries in 2014, and Omni in 2015. And if you look at the interiors of each one of these, they just get more and more elaborate. They are trying to outdo each other. Remember that in Las Vegas, it is not codes that drive or changes, it is competition. So what one does, the other one must do bigger and better. And this is very appealing to that younger millennial demographic who wants to party, who wants to live an excessive lifestyle that would otherwise not be possible in their everyday lives. And then our pools also take another turn as well. So we begin to see the idea of day clubs, and more than day clubs, we get European style beaches or pools, or topless/nude pools as well. So we are importing this exotic idea, this risky idea that would not otherwise be possible anywhere else in the United States, and we're capitalizing on it in Las Vegas. So we're going to start by talking about the Wynn Casino. The Wynn Casino really starts with this piece right here. It translates to The Dream by Picasso. So The Dream was at the time the most expensive painting or piece of art in the world that had recently been purchased by Steve Wynn, and it is a very surrealist image that was going to inspire what the Wynn was all about. Now unfortunately, when Wynn was unveiling the painting, he does like to talk a lot with his hands. He elbowed it and he ripped a 6-inch seam through the painting, which devalued it by like $70 million. Now, the interesting part here is that his insurance company refused to pay for it. He sued them, he got more money, and so he ended up profiting off of ruining the Picasso by like $20 million. So, goes to show. But by this point, the theme for the Wynn had been set. Even though the Picasso was no longer going to be featured here, this idea of surrealism, of living in a dream, was going to be what the Wynn was going to be inspired by. So, the three things we see in the Wynn are the idea of harlequins. So this idea of having a circus fest, but not in a circus way, in a more elevated and abstracted way. We also see that we have florals and surrealism meshed together. So it's not just a regular flower, it is an oversized flower, or flower with an eye inside of it. And we have the influence of the Rococo. So if you go into the Wynn, you basically see an explosion of these three things. Lots of florals, very light and pastel colors. It is not the same dark casino floor approach that we've been seeing for decades now. And we see that the Wynn begins to take on a whole different identity from the Bellagio or the Mirage, who all have separate themes. The theme here is the brand, because that is what Gen X and what the millennial demographic want to see. And I do want to show you just how far that branding goes. You can buy everything that you use in the Wynn and bring it to your own home. So there are Wynn branded products. And if you notice, the scent is something that sells. So when Wynn opened the Wynn, he did have a signature scent that is patented, and it is called Asian Rain. So you can buy the candle, you can buy the fragrance, the room spray, if you want to bring back the Wynn to your home. So it goes to show, right, the branding is becoming quite important now. Now I want us to look at the actual site plan, because there's a couple of things that change, some interesting moves going on. You'll notice that the entrance into the Wynn is through an arcade just like the Bellagio, but what we see is that we have a much, much smaller public area in the Wynn now. The other two entrances are going to be by direct car or limousine. So we're having a more exclusive approach now, less democratic, if you will. It's not really inviting everyone in, because the concept of the Wynn was not to bring in the other people from all these other resorts. The concept of the Wynn was that you were staying in Wynn's property as his personal guest, and all of the amenities are for you. They are not for these outsiders who cannot afford to stay at the Wynn. And for that reason, if you look at the shape of the casino itself, it is a bar shape. It is no longer the T shape or the Y shape that is aiming to have a lot of rooms in the floor plates. It is now a bar shape that is not only more elegant, but it has less rooms. And so the rooms become more exclusive, you can charge higher prices, and they also have greater views out to the rest of the valley. So the only public area of the approach of the Wynn is that right there. You compare that to the Mirage, Treasure Island, and the Bellagio, which have enormous parts of public entertainment. This is actually very, very modest. And then you have the private area, which is a lot larger. There's the bar shape that I was telling you all about. And I want to take us really quickly to the street view of the Wynn. Most of you have probably passed it on a daily basis, and you've seen this huge wall of trees. They did have to bring in a ton of earth and dirt in order to build this up. There's actually an internal elevator just for landscapers to use to manicure this whole area. But the idea was to create a secret garden. It is highly exclusive because of the fact that you cannot see it. And so Wynn has capitalized on his own casinos who give you everything up front, and now he's doing the opposite, so people want to come see what he has to offer here now that the brand is recognized as one of the best in Las Vegas. And the only public area is going to be that little bit right there. Just this little corner. That's all you can see, and yet that is enough to bring people in to the casino. Now what he does is he does bring in these waterfalls, and he does create this optical illusion that they're getting further and further away, and they're layering, and they're adding this auditory feeling where you hear the water splashing, it feels cool and crisp, and you want to come into the property, and you just want to know what could possibly be behind this waterfall. So you'll notice that the entrance, very normal, very standard, just a normal look. It's pretty. As you get into the Wynn, we begin to see those harlequin, florals, rococo themes come to life. You'll notice there are lots of bright colors. All of these are custom pieces. They were designed by Roger Thomas, the interior designer. And by the way, I have some good news for you guys. The top 10 people, so the top 10 collages, will have an opportunity to meet Roger Thomas and get a copied version of, or autographed version of his new book that he's going to be launching at the Neon Museum. So another thing to look forward to. But Roger Thomas is the mastermind behind this idea. There are the famous gardens. Once again, it is not just a flower garden. It's not like the botanical gardens at the Bellagio. It is a whimsical garden, right? And yet it's not doing too much like the Bellagio is doing. It doesn't have to in order to bring in that higher-end demographic. And then you look at the dining experience, and you really see it all come to life and mesh together. All light colors. We're bringing in daylight. We are no longer keeping people in the dark in order to make them gamble. You don't have to do that with this demographic because they're literally here for that reason. Then you get into the actual Lake of Dreams, and we can once again see the surrealism that is beginning to take place. These would normally rise and fall and have all this movement that would otherwise be considered impossible anywhere else. And then you have the ultra surreal shows that go on in the Lake of Dreams. So that is what is directly behind that screen of greenery, and this is what people come to the Wynn to discover. And all of the shows, if you've ever watched one, you know that they're not really logical. They try to do crazy ideas. They don't really make a lot of sense, just like the Picasso painting doesn't make a lot of sense logically. But that's the idea, it's a form of escapism and being in a dream. At the same time, we see the power of branding continues to grow, where we see other casinos are bringing in famous hotel chains into the property. So no longer is Mandalay Bay just the Mandalay Bay Hotel. It also, brings in the Four Seasons, which later becomes the Waldorf. So we're bringing in famous hotel chains that these demographics usually go to in order to bring them into the property. Caesars goes through a very similar thing. It brings in the Nobu Hotel. So now we're seeing a brand within a brand. Really quickly, I do want to talk about the Palazzo and the Encore. I told you Adelson and Wynn at this point are frenemies. They drive each other's buildings to become bigger and better. So we have the original Venetian by Adelson, and then Wynn comes in with the Wynn. Now we do have two additions to both of these properties. On the one hand, we have the Palazzo. Originally was going to be 460 feet tall, so just slightly taller than the Venetian. But when Adelson learns that Wynn is building the Encore at 614 feet, he quickly has his architects redo the architecture, and he one-ups him just by 30 feet to make it 642 feet. So now he can lay claim to the largest tower on the Strip. Now the interesting thing with both the Encore and the Palazzo is that they are more actively catering to that millennial demographic, and the architecture reflects that. So you'll notice that compared to the Wynn that at least had a little bit of landscape out there, the approach to the Encore is very exclusive. You can't really see anything. In fact, everything that's going on is on the second floor. So you can hear things, you can hear the water splashing, and that makes you want to be in there as well. You want to be in that exclusive space, and so you're gonna pay the premium in order to be a part of the famous day club at the Encore. The interiors follow a very, very similar theme to the Wynn. It just gets a little bit more bright and less whimsical. And then we have XS, the ultimate nightclub. XS, of course, meaning the excess of luxury, because that is the branding that they are going for. And all of the materials in here are genuine leather. They are very expensive, so it's not just fake luxury, this is real luxury. And you can have it for a nicer price than if you were going to an actual metropolis. So that becomes the appeal of these two properties. Palazzo, same thing. You notice the streetscape is very exclusive as well. You don't really see anything on the ground here. What you do see is dining terraces on the second floor. So as you walk by, you can smell the food, you can see the people eating up there, and you want to be a part of that exclusive crowd as well. Compared to the Venetian, which opens up its whole public area to the guests for free. So the Palazzo, once again, is taking on a new approach to this demographic. The Palazzo is inspired actually by the Southern California lifestyle, and to some degree the Las Vegas lifestyle. So if you've ever been to Town Square or Tivoli Village, they all have very similar aesthetics, you know, like an Italian version through an American filter, and that is what the Palazzo is going after. So you'll notice that it's not really as true to actual Venice or Italy as the Venetian is. It's a little bit more abstracted. It looks Italian, but you can't really pinpoint it to any particular time period or any particular landmark anymore. It's just the idea. And at the same time, we do have Town Square and Tivoli coming up in Las Vegas. So we see that this idea of the Southern California filter over Europe is really popular with the millennial demographic. Now, in order to beat Wynn once again, Adelson does propose to have condos on the Strip, and this is a new idea. So they're going, what if we bring people in here that actually live on the Strip, that can live here seasonally, they can come here, they are gonna be the most exclusive of all the demographics that come in here. And unfortunately, it never got constructed because of the recession in the late 2000s. So to date, if you walk the Strip and you see this tower, most of you have probably seen it. It is covered with vinyl pieces to replicate what the Regis Tower would have looked like. And if you look at it at the right time of day, you'll notice that it's just scaffolding behind there. They do have to change it every so often because the sun does tend to fade it. But that was supposed to be a super tall tower of exclusive condos. But Adelson was not the only person that came up with this idea. At the same time that he was coming up with the idea of condos in Las Vegas, so were other developers. So if you look at the streets behind the Strip, If you look at Paradise, if you look at Koval, you'll notice that there's a lot of high rises that begin to pop up, and all of them are either timeshares, condos, apartments of sorts. They're not gonna be your standard hotel room. But the problem with all this is we just don't have enough tourism, or at least enough of that upper demographic of tourists to fill all of these. So they start becoming what we call ghost towers. If you've ever seen the two on the other side of the Harmon, on the other side of the freeway on Harmon, you look at it at night and you'll notice that there aren't a lot of lights on inside, and that's because they're still quite empty today. The Palms also goes through a similar phase. You'll notice not many lights are on. They're ghost towers for the most part. And the biggest development that comes out of this era is gonna be our city center. Now, this process of having more vertical development, condos, towers, is what we call the Manhattanization of Las Vegas. Manhattanization is a phenomenon that is not just exclusive to us. It really applies to anywhere that has more density, more of an urban feeling, more of a metropolitan approach to its city planning. So usually it just comes in the form of dense towers. And the city center is really the pinnacle of Manhattanization. So we're gonna study it quite closely, talk about some of the issues, some of the pros and the cons. This is the original plan for what the city center was going to be. So we have our Aria in the yellow, the main hotel, just our standard, strip resort. We have our Mandarin Oriental, which is a well-recognized hotel chain. The idea with the Mandarin Oriental is if you once again bring a brand within the brand, you will bring in a very niche demographic, which in this case was going to be your high rollers from Asia, because it is a popular and luxurious hotel chain on the East Asian area. We also have our Veer Towers, which are all condos. We have our Crystal Shops, and then the Harmon Hotel. The Harmon Hotel, because of its size, was meant to be the most exclusive hotel tower in Las Vegas. It was meant to be the place where celebrities would go, and it was going to be completely closed off to the public. You could only arrive through the VIP section in a limousine. You could only really see it from the outside if you were a tourist. And then we have the Vdara, which is also condos. So we're seeing that we're diversifying the amounts of spaces we're having on the strip. Now, the casino that used to be here is the Boardwalk. So if you were here in the early 2000s up until 2007, you probably saw it. It was like a Coney Island theme. It was like a circus, except New York circus. They did tear it down in order to make way for the city center project. Now, to make the city center profitable and make it marketable as well for that high-end demographic, they knew that they couldn't just make good-looking architecture. They had to bring in the Starchitect power. And so they went after a ton of Starchitects. They asked every Starchitect that there was, and all of them, for the most part, said something along the lines of, I don't do volcanoes, so what do you want from me? So a lot of them turned down the project because it was in Las Vegas, which they didn't feel was an appropriate place for any architecture of their caliber. The reason why we wanted to do this is because there's such a thing known as the Bilbao effect. So in Bilbao, in Spain, there is a museum by Gehry, and the city, when it was proposing its redevelopment and it wanted to go through an urban renaissance, decided to hire Gehry because his architecture is well known around the world. It is literally his brand. This style right here is a Gehry. And so when he built this, it did bring in millions of tourists. The building essentially paid for itself in 3 years, which is, excuse me, very quickly for a Gehry building. And other cities around the world started taking note. If you bring in a star architect to create a crystal, a jewel to crown your city, you're gonna bring in a lot of tourism. And Las Vegas is, of course, not gonna be blind to this. They are going to be very interested in the idea of having in more tourists, and if it means bringing in the Starchitects, well, that's what they're going to do. And so the Starchitects that they land upon are Daniel Libeskind, the designer of the Jewish Museum that we looked at last semester. He's going to be in charge of our Crystal Shops. We have Sir Norman Foster, who designed the Gherkin in London. He designs the Harmon Tower. Cesar Pelli, who designs the I'm blanking on the name. They're in Malaysia, though. The Petronas Towers. and he's gonna design the Aria. We have Raphael Vignoli, he designs the Vidara, and then we have Melo Jean, he designs the Beer Towers. So we have an architect from Poland, we have a British architect, we have a Argentine architect, we have a Uruguayan architect, and we have a German architect. Architects from all over the world except the United States. And then we have our artists. So we have Nancy Rubens, Maya Lin, who famously designs the Silver Rivers. If you had Maya Lin, I know some of you included this in your collages. We have Jenny Holzer. So we're also bringing in exclusive artists, but I do want to quickly flip between these two. You'll notice that all of the architects that were selected are still, the usual image of what a architect is, and then our women are gonna be our artists in the projects. So architecture still continues to be the same after many years. And this was the proposed rendering for what it was going to look like, which for the most part came true. Raphael Vignoli says, everything else around in Las Vegas is the un-architecture. It is a cartoon, it is a horror show. So we know that the architects, even if they're designing here and they accepted to make these buildings, are not very fond of the city. And what they decide to do is they collectively decide we're gonna ignore all context, we're gonna ignore the rest of Las Vegas, everything that is not us. We're only gonna react to each other like we are a real city. So you'll notice that the curvatures on some of these do play off of each other because that is what they decided upon. They're gonna react to each other's context, but ignore everything else. And that's gonna bring us some problems in the future. Now the entrance to the city center, as you can see, gets even more exclusive. The setback of the Aria, the main resort of the whole complex, is all the way back there. There is no public entertainment approach. There is no show to draw people in. And the main approach, you'll notice, is not a sidewalk. It is a huge 6-lane boulevard. So it makes it even more exclusive. You kind of do have to arrive here with a limousine, with a private car, a taxi, something that will signify that you are of the elite class, or that will make you feel that way at least. Same way, that's how you approach the beer towers, that is how you approach the Mandarin Oriental, you approach it by car. Same thing with the Vidara. The pedestrian approaches are really just into the crystals. They are very limited though, and the crystals, if you've ever been, are only super high-end stores. So even if middle class, lower class people can enter the crystals and can walk around it, they're honestly not the target demographic, and they'll most likely not really buy anything. So we're gonna start with the Aria, standard hotel tower. The interior, you'll notice, is not very casino-like. You could almost imagine that this is in a true metropolis, in New York City, in San Francisco. What we're seeing, and we continue to see it today, is that we're moving away from the idea of gaming. Not that we don't still have gaming floors, but we're also having exclusive towers that don't have any smoking. We're having gaming-free hotel rooms. So we're seeing that the younger demographics, now that Gen Z is also entering the Vegas tourist industry, doesn't really like to smoke or game as much, and you have to provide a place for them to stay and fill that need. And the Aria and some of the other newer properties begin to do that. I did want to show you the marketing for the Aria and compare it to what we saw with the Mirage. And pay attention to the characters in it as well.
Las Vegas.
All right. So, for one, our main characters in it are a young millennial couple, right? They are single, and they do have a sex appeal to them, right? They showed her topless in the pool. They are trying to show that this is not a resort like the other ones. This is a cool resort, right? And then if you notice the voiceover, it is a woman that is speaking in a very sultry tone compared to what we saw at the Mirage or what we saw at the Bellagio, where it is a very deep and cinematic male voice that is selling us an experience. Here they are selling us something else. So the marketing itself is already hinting to the fact that the demographic is changing. Then we have the Norman Foster Harmon Tower. Now the Harmon Tower, I'm sure most of you have heard the story. Harmon Tower did have a problem when it was being constructed. The rebar was not done correctly. Excuse me. It does have cast-in-place concrete slabs that need rebar reinforcement. And they discovered that there was a mistake when they were casting it. Because it is cast in place, you can't just take it out. You would have to essentially rip the whole building apart. And it was just not considered profitable. So they built it up to 28 stories. And they decided, we could either keep it as a hotel tower that's only 28 stories, which honestly would not justify the cost of operating it, or we could rebuild it. But rebuilding it would also be completely out of the budget. So they ultimately decided to bring it down. But the Harmon Tower was located right on that corner so that the people who stayed here would have the best views of the Strip. Again, it was exclusive. People, you and I, would not be able to probably go into it. And being that we are architecture students and Sir Norman Foster is an architect, we would probably want to go see it. This was the concept for the facade, so the idea of a moving metropolis. And this is how they began to execute it before they took it down, of course. The Veer Towers also had a very interesting approach to them, and we have Hilmasham say on his website, the Veer Towers begin with a vision for density set against Las Vegas's sprawling urban fabric. Until its inception, the memory of Las Vegas skyline was graphical. Our goal is to make it architectural. So already he is making a differentiation between his architecture and the existing architecture. And then he goes on to say, in our approach, the context was not the historical background to build upon, but the framework to establish a new order and create a new image. So we very clearly see that it is not just a interpretation. They are literally telling us they did not pay attention to any of the historical context or even environmental context, as we'll see. They are simply reacting to each other and in their words to create a new order and a new image. So they are imposing themselves upon the city. That aside, it is a really cool building. It does have these really cool slanting leaning columns. It's probably my favorite piece of the whole city structure. Also very exclusive though, because it's condos. It's not really open to general public. We have KPF, Kahn Pedersen Fox. They are a very famous firm. They're like a star architect firm, if you will. They designed the Mandarin Oriental Tower. It's like the most boring of the pieces of architecture that we see, but still very exclusive. It almost looks like the building reflects upon itself over a pool or body of water. And then we have the Vdara. The Vdara is where we begin to see some contextual problems. This is by Raphael Vignoli, the guy who said Las Vegas is the un-architecture. And he says, the Vdara is distinguished by its slender profile and curvature, which, in his words, responds to Harmon Circle and the interlocking arcs of the Aria Hotel complex. So he's telling us he's directly reacting to the Aria. He says modern, light, and devoid of graphics or ornaments, aka what Las Vegas is, Vdara presents a distinctive contrast to the themed buildings of the Las Vegas Strip. So we see that they are all speaking about Las Vegas with lots of disdain. However, the problem with the Vdara and its reaction to the Aria is going to be that it becomes the so-called death ray. So the death ray happens when you have all of this sun, because again, they're not reacting to the context. So you have all of this Vegas desert sun coming onto a glass skyscraper and coming down to the pool where it does cause third-degree burns, it's like melting plastic, it's causing all sorts of disasters because the architect didn't care about the context. And in his words, everything around is the un-architecture except this. So just, bringing it back to our conversation on Starchitects, this is one of the problems with endorsing Starchitects and allowing them to do whatever they want, is that sometimes what they create isn't necessarily the best for a city. Not to say they're all bad. I actually like Leapskin's piece. I think it's one of the best ones here. But generally speaking, once you have a Starchitect that commissioned over and over, it gets to their head. Then we have our crystal shops, right? Crystal Shops were conceived to look like a museum on the inside, and it kind of does, right? It looks like it's a Jewish museum, very exclusive. You can see people shop, you're being seen shopping. And again, for people who can't afford it, it's just a place for you to walk around and see things, a museum of expensive items. But the Washington Post says about it, is this the sort of thing that progressive architects should be involved in? So remember, Daniel Libeskind was the person who designed the Jewish Museum in Berlin. And when you think about that, and when you think about the fact he's designing a mall in Las Vegas, that is why he got so much hate for this project. Because people are saying, how could you possibly go from designing such a deep and monumental piece to designing something so shallow? And he responds by saying the crystals are a rich, urban, cosmopolitan scheme, one that you could find in New York or in Paris. And the intent was to give a world, a simulacra, something original and real. So, we go back and forth with the idea of Starkitecture here. Libeskind is defending it, and he's saying if it was in New York or if it was in Paris, you guys wouldn't be saying anything. But the fact that it's in Las Vegas, in a world of simulacra, as he calls it, makes it bad for you. And he also begins to open up the conversation, should a Starkitect be able to do any type of project that they wish, or should they have to stick to the higher, more mighty types of projects like museums and memorials? Now, the Harmon Tower gets taken down. We do have the addition of this right here, which honestly to me is a ripoff of the crystals, a very cheap looking version. It's called the 63 at City Center, named after the age of the developer at the time. They were 63. And this is what it looks like, right? So we can see it's trying to be crystals, but it's not. They honestly should have just brought Libeskind back to finish it off. And we begin to get conversations, could it be a real city? Does it function as a real city? And critics say no, it cannot. It is not walkable. There are no pedestrian pathways. There is a monorail, but the monorail takes you from Vidara to Aria, back and forth. It doesn't take you anywhere else like a real city would. So as much as they were reacting to each other and creating a metropolis, it ultimately did not work out. And in the words of Stefanel, the theme of the city center is the world's financial districts. So if you look at downtown Chicago, New York City, San Francisco, Boston, I think I got one from like Philadelphia as well. They all look the same, and that's what Crystals is doing as well. So sure, it's not themed, but if you really look at it, it's just copying this. This is the theme of the Crystals, or the city center. And right next to it, to finish off this lecture, we do have the Cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan is the densest project that we have on the script. It is 10 times denser than the Bellagio because the entire footprint of it has building on it. It has a 4-foot underground parking structure, which is an absolute mess because the grid of the structure does not match the grid that a car works with, so they have to shift the grid. If you go down there, it's a maze. You'll notice that there's I think it's called like the Jockey Club. It's inset into it, so they couldn't really buy them and use this area. But the Cosmo is interesting because it gets even more exclusive. So you'll notice that it's up on a podium that is 3 stories tall in this case. And though for a long time people believed you're not going to have pedestrians and guests going up into your upper levels, put everything interesting on the first floor, Cosmopolitan flips that and they go, we will make people go up to the 3rd floor because we're going to make them see it and want it. So for one, the pool is out here. The pool once again becomes a symbol of luxury, becomes a billboard, you can hear it, you want to be there. The Marquee nightclub is very strategically also placed right here. So as you're walking by there, as you're sitting across on the Planet Hollywood, you can see the club and you want to be in there as well. And then the actual podium, 3 stories tall, gambling on the bottom, dining, and entertainment. And once again, what do the younger demographics want? They want the experiences. They don't necessarily want the gaming as much. And so as they come in on the casino floor, we have this huge atrium with a chandelier. And the concept of the Cosmopolitan is to see and to be seen. You are in the chandelier, you want to be in the chandelier, you want to be a part of the experience as well. As you're down here, you can smell food, you want to go up into those upper levels, etc. So it's really calling and preying upon that younger millennial demographic and the fact that they are not going to gamble to bring them up into the rest of the property. Now after this, we were going to get Fontainebleau and the Echelon, which we know were not really finished up until a couple years ago. So once the recession hit, all of this got paused. Fontainebleau eventually did get finished under the same brand. It's still kind of empty though if you go, they haven't fully finished it. I feel like it's really devoid of a theme right now. And then Echelon got completely rebranded to the Resorts World. And if you notice, Resorts World has a Hilton, it has the Conrad, another famous hotel chain, and so they're really, once again, using branding to bring people in. Now, to finish this off, the exportation of Las Vegas. Macau started its own Las Vegas, right? So they start their gambling in 2002. That is when Macau begins, and by 2008, literally 6 years later, Macau was making more than double what Las Vegas had made. They had surpassed us in 7 years of development compared to our 70 years of development. Why? Because they already had the model in place. They saw what Las Vegas was doing. They knew what worked, what didn't work. They knew how to make a mousetrap, and they just placed it in Macau. And they did it bigger, and to some degree, better. And so they started making much more profit. This aerial image is from like 2013, so it's even bigger today. And they call it the Cotai Strip right here. And we see Adelson when all of the major developers take their hotel chains, and because these brands are already well known, because the Venetian is already a known landmark, not the fake one, not the real one, I mean, but the fake one at this point, they bring that to Macau as well, and that sells quite well. There is the strip today. The only issue with the one in Macau is it's not a straight up and down street, it's like a district, so it doesn't work as well as a highway. But what we learned from Macau and the fact that they are successful in copying Las Vegas is that it's not just about having a singular casino or 2 or 3 together, it's about connecting them with major highways and avenues. It is the architecture of the highway that ultimately makes it successful. And Detroit has them, New York has casinos now, a lot of Native American reservations have casinos now because they've seen that it works and they are importing the architecture of Vegas for profits. So in this architecture age, to summarize, we learn about number 1, the power of branding and really tugging on millennial and Gen X heartstrings, and number 2, the idea of exporting the strip and how successful that would be as a business venture. All right? I will see you guys on Thursday. I do have some paint chips up here if you do want to use them for a collage. They're available to you.